Elena Harper stood in the kitchen of her modest two-bedroom apartment, preparing afternoon coffee, when she heard her mother-in-law's voice drifting in from the backyard. Vivian was speaking softly with the neighbor, but the tone was different, almost conspiratorial. Fragments of words reached Elena through the open window. Secret meeting, every Saturday afternoon, nobody can know. Elena's heart began to race. She recognized that furtive behavior. 30 years ago, she had witnessed something similar with her own mother, and it had not ended well. When Vivian walked back into the house with an odd expression on her face, Elena made a decision. Next Saturday, she would follow her mother-in-law. She needed to discover what was happening before it was too late. But what Elena would find that afternoon would change everything forever. Elena was 45 years old and had been married to Nathan Harper, a successful attorney from a traditional family, for 18 years. Their wedding in 2007 had been a dream come true. Elena herself worked as a literature teacher at a public high school downtown, earning a modest salary that barely covered her personal expenses. Nathan, on the other hand, came from a wealthy family. His mother, Vivian Caldwell, had been widowed for 13 years and lived alone in a spacious house in the upscale part of town. The 74-year-old woman remained active and independent, something Elena had always admired. In the early years of their marriage, Elena had worked hard to earn her mother-in-law's approval. Vivian was polite, but maintained a certain distance, as if constantly evaluating whether Elena was worthy of her son. Visits to Vivian's house happened every Sunday, a ritual Nathan insisted on maintaining. Elena would bake homemade cakes, help with household chores, and patiently listen to stories about her late father-in-law, Richard Caldwell, a respected businessman who had left considerable assets to the family. Vivian spoke of her husband with adoration, describing their 36 years of marriage as perfect and flawless. As months passed, Elena began noticing small peculiarities in her mother-in-law's behavior. Vivian received phone calls that left her visibly nervous. Sometimes during Sunday lunches, the woman seemed distant, as if her mind were somewhere completely different. Nathan never noticed anything unusual, but Elena had an eye trained for details. Her work as a teacher had taught her to observe subtle changes in people's behavior. There was something different about Vivian, something the woman was working hard to hide. In October of 2025, Elena noticed that Vivian had started leaving her house every Saturday afternoon. When Nathan asked about these outings, his mother responded vaguely that she was visiting friends or running errands. The answer always satisfied her son, but left Elena intrigued. A woman as organized as Vivian, who planned every detail of her routine, suddenly had vague and indefinite commitments. It made no sense. Elena, however, kept her suspicions to herself, not wanting to appear intrusive or distrustful without concrete reasons. Elena's distrust had deep roots in her past. When she was 17 years old in 1995, her mother had behaved in a similar manner. Mysterious outings, whispered phone calls, lies about non-existent meetings. Elena had discovered in a painful way that her mother was maintaining an extramarital affair that destroyed her family. Her father never recovered from the betrayal, and Elena grew up carrying the mark of that traumatic discovery. Seeing similar patterns in Vivian's behavior awakened an old and familiar anxiety within her. Could it be possible that her mother-in-law, at 74 years old, was involved in something compromising? The apartment Elena and Nathan rented was only 15 minutes from Vivian's house. It was a comfortable two-bedroom space, tastefully decorated by Elena, who loved plants and books. The couple had a peaceful routine. Nathan left early for the law office while Elena headed to the school. On Saturdays, Nathan took advantage of the time to play tennis with friends from the club, a habit he had maintained since adolescence. This meant Elena was alone in the mornings, time she usually used to grade papers and prepare lessons. It was a simple life, but Elena was satisfied and genuinely in love with her husband. Nathan was the opposite of all the boyfriends Elena had before. Attentive, responsible, and deeply dedicated to his family, he represented the stability she had always sought. At 6 feet tall, with neatly combed brown hair and hazel eyes, Nathan drew attention wherever he went. But what really won Elena over was his genuine kindness. They met in 2005 during a charity event at the school where Elena taught. Nathan was there representing the law firm that offered free legal assistance to the community. The connection was immediate and natural. During their courtship, which lasted almost 2 years, Elena met the entire Caldwell family. Besides Vivian, there was Nathan's older sister, Stephanie, who was married and living in another state. Stephanie visited their mother monthly, but maintained a cordial and distant relationship. It was evident that Nathan was the favorite son, the one who had assumed the responsibility of caring for Vivian after their father's death. Elena always respected this dedication, even when it meant changes in the couple's plans. For Nathan, his mother came first, and Elena accepted this as part of the package of loving that wonderful man. Elena's professional life was also going well. After 20 years teaching at the same school, she had earned the respect of colleagues and the affection of students. Her salary was still modest, but she loved what she did. Teaching literature was more than a profession for Elena. It was a calling. Seeing teenagers' eyes light up when discovering classic authors made all the effort worthwhile. Nathan had always supported his wife's career, even knowing she would never earn as much as he did. Their love was not based on money, but on mutual respect and true partnership. However, that October afternoon in 2025 would change everything. Elena was at home in the kitchen of the apartment she shared with Nathan, preparing a carrot cake with chocolate frosting. It was Saturday, and Nathan was at the club playing tennis as usual. Elena had decided to make a surprise and take the fresh cake to Vivian, taking advantage of the opportunity for an informal visit. While waiting for the cake to bake, she heard her cell phone ring. It was her mother-in-law, but Elena let the call go to voicemail. Minutes later, she received a text message. "Elena, dear, you do not need to come today. I will be out all afternoon." The message was simple, but something in the formal and abrupt tone deeply bothered Elena. That same October afternoon, Elena decided to do something she never imagined. She got in her car and drove to Vivian's house. She did not intend to go inside, just confirm if her mother-in-law had actually left. It was almost 3 in the afternoon when Elena parked on the adjacent street, from where she could see the house without being noticed. Minutes later, the garage door opened, and Vivian's gray sedan pulled out, heading toward downtown. Elena waited a few seconds and then began to follow her mother-in-law, keeping a safe distance. Her heart was beating fast. What was she doing? Spying on her mother-in-law like a private detective? Vivian drove for approximately 20 minutes, until reaching a neighborhood Elena only knew in passing. It was a simpler area of town, with modest houses and narrow streets, nothing that matched Vivian's standard of living. Her mother-in-law parked in front of a small house painted pale yellow with a little garden in front. Elena stopped her car a few houses ahead, watching attentively. Vivian got out of the vehicle carrying a large bag and rang the doorbell. A woman of simple appearance, around 40 years old, answered the door with a warm smile and hugged Vivian as if they were old friends. Elena sat observing for almost an hour. Vivian did not come out of the house. There was nothing obviously suspicious happening, but the entire situation was strange. Why would Vivian lie about visiting friends at the club if she was there in that simple neighborhood? Elena thought about leaving, but something kept her there. The same intuition that had alerted her about her mother years ago was screaming that something important was happening. Finally, at 4:30 in the afternoon, Vivian emerged from the house. She looked different, lighter, with a genuine smile on her face. She got into her car and left. Elena waited a few more minutes and then returned home, confused and disturbed. During dinner, Elena almost told Nathan about what she had done. Almost. But looking at her husband, so calm and confident, she could not do it. What if she was wrong? What if there was a perfectly innocent explanation? Nathan adored his mother unconditionally. Accusing her of something without concrete evidence could create an irreparable rift in the family relationship. Elena decided to wait, to investigate a little more before sharing her suspicions, but inside, anxiety was growing. She knew that feeling, had lived through it before. Something definitely was not right with Vivian Caldwell. The following week, Elena could barely concentrate on her classes. Her mind constantly returned to that afternoon, to that pale yellow house, to that warm embrace between Vivian and the unknown woman. Who was that person? What was Vivian carrying in that large bag? Why all the mystery? Elena found herself researching online about suspicious behavior in elderly people, but found nothing that applied to the situation. Vivian was perfectly lucid, healthy, and independent. There were no signs of dementia or mental confusion. Whatever she was doing, it was something deliberate and conscious. Sunday at Vivian's house was torture for Elena. Her mother-in-law was particularly animated, talking about a new painting class she would start the following week and about preparations for Christmas. Still 2 months away. Nathan was happy seeing his mother so well-disposed. Elena observed every gesture, every word, looking for clues. But Vivian was a consummate actress. Nothing in her behavior indicated that she kept secrets. When Elena casually mentioned that she would love to meet Vivian's friends, her mother-in-law just smiled and said, "One of these days I will organize a tea party and introduce you, dear." But the tone was vague, evasive, exactly like when she talked about her Saturday outings. Elena began paying more attention to conversations between Nathan and Vivian. During a phone call midweek, she heard Nathan ask how the meeting with friends had gone on Saturday. Vivian responded with vague details. "Very pleasant. We went to the mall, had coffee." But Elena knew it was a lie. Vivian had not gone to any mall. She had gone to that pale yellow house in a simple neighborhood. Why lie to her own son? What kind of activity required so much secrecy? Elena's mind began creating increasingly worrying scenarios. Could it be gambling, debt, some kind of scam? The following Saturday, Elena followed Vivian again. This time she was more prepared, wearing sunglasses and a cap, feeling ridiculous but determined. Vivian repeated exactly the same route, arriving at the pale yellow house around 3 in the afternoon. Once again, she was warmly received by the same woman. This time, Elena also saw 2 children, a boy and a girl, who ran to hug Vivian when she entered. Her mother-in-law laughed, picked up the girl, and went into the house. Elena felt her stomach turn. Children. Vivian had a relationship with a family nobody knew about. What did this mean? Elena discreetly took some photos with her cell phone. She did not know exactly why, but it seemed important to document what she was seeing. She observed the house more carefully this time. There were toys in the small front yard, clothes drying on the side clothesline. It was a common residence of an apparently normal family, but Vivian's presence there was completely inexplicable. For 2 hours, Elena remained in her car, alternating between looking at the house and checking social media on her phone, trying to appear like anyone waiting for someone. When Vivian finally left at 5 in the afternoon, Elena noticed she looked tired but happy. That night, Elena dreamed about her mother. In the dream, she was back to that terrible day in 1995 when she discovered the betrayal. She saw herself as a teenager again, feeling the same pain, the same anger, the same sensation that the world was collapsing. She woke up startled, her heart racing, her face wet with tears. Nathan slept peacefully beside her, oblivious to the turmoil of his wife's emotions. Elena got up, went to the kitchen, and drank a glass of water. She looked out the window at the silent city. She needed to discover the truth about Vivian, not out of morbid curiosity, but to protect Nathan. If her mother-in-law was involved in something problematic, he had the right to know before it exploded in their faces. It was early November of 2025. When Elena finally decided she needed to discover who the people in that pale yellow house were. During the week, between one class and another, she returned to that neighborhood, always at different times, trying to understand the dynamics of that family. She observed that the boy, who appeared to be around 17 years old, left for school early in the morning. The younger girl, maybe 13 or 14, was taken by the woman who had received Vivian. There was also a man, probably the father, who left for work around 7 in the morning. It was a common working family, with nothing extraordinary or suspicious. One day, Elena gathered courage and entered a bakery near the house. She ordered a coffee and struck up a conversation with the attendant, a friendly lady who seemed to know everyone in the neighborhood. She casually commented about the house, with pale yellow paint, saying she found the color charming. The attendant smiled and said, "Oh, that is Grace and her family's house. Good people. They went through difficult times, but they are fighters." Elena wanted to ask more questions but feared appearing too invasive. At least now she had a name, Grace. It was a start. That same day, Elena did something that deeply embarrassed her. She searched for the name on social media. She found Grace Bellamy's profile, a 42-year-old woman. The photos showed a simple and united family. Grace worked as an administrative assistant, and there were 2 children, Lucas, 17 years old, and Chloe, 14. There was nothing on the profiles that connected this family to Vivian Caldwell. No photos together, no mention. It was as if they were completely separate worlds that, for some mysterious reason, crossed every Saturday afternoon. Elena spent the week tormented by curiosity and guilt. She was spying on her mother-in-law, violating her privacy in an unacceptable way, but at the same time, she felt there was something important at stake. Nathan deserved to know if his mother was involved in something strange. During Sunday lunch at Vivian's house, Elena observed her mother-in-law with even more attention. Vivian was wearing a ring Elena had never seen before, a simple but beautiful piece. When she complimented the jewelry, Vivian touched it affectionately and said, "It was a gift from someone very special." She did not elaborate, and Nathan did not ask. But Elena saw a different gleam in her mother-in-law's eyes, something between nostalgia and happiness. In the second week of November, Elena did something even bolder. She called the phone number of Grace's house, which she had found in an online search. When a female voice answered, Elena felt her throat go dry. She improvised a flimsy excuse about looking for a former teacher who lived in that neighborhood. Grace was polite, but said she did not know anyone by that name. Before hanging up, Elena heard in the background a child's voice calling, "Mom!" "Grandma," Viv called. Elena's heart raced. Grandma Viv. The children called her mother-in-law Grandma. That revelation changed everything. Vivian was not a grandmother to Lucas and Chloe. Elena knew the Caldwell family perfectly. Stephanie, Nathan's older sister, had no children. Nathan was an only child on the other side. So why were those children calling Vivian Grandma? Elena's mind began forming increasingly disturbing theories. Could it be possible that Richard, her late father-in-law, had had a parallel family? Were Lucas and Chloe children from an extramarital relationship of Richard that Vivian now supported out of guilt or moral obligation? The idea seemed absurd, but it was not impossible. Elena barely slept that night. Nathan noticed something was bothering her and asked if everything was okay. She invented an excuse about stress at work. How could she say, "Honey, I have been following your mother and discovered she visits a strange family every Saturday, and the children call her Grandma?" It would sound like a crazy accusation. She needed more information, concrete evidence, to understand the whole story before involving Nathan. But the anxiety was becoming unbearable. Elena began having constant headaches and difficulty concentrating in classes. A new plan began forming in her mind. The following Saturday, she would not just follow Vivian. She would knock on that door and confront the situation directly. It was risky and potentially humiliating, But Elena saw no other way out. She could not live with that uncertainty eating away at her insides. She thought about hiring a private detective, but dismissed the idea as too expensive and overly dramatic. No, she would solve this herself. After all, what could go wrong? Either Vivian had a reasonable explanation and everything would be clarified, or Elena would discover something that would change the Caldwell family forever. On Thursday of that week, Elena was grading papers in the teacher's lounge when her colleague Amanda approached. Amanda taught history, and they had been friends for years. "Elena, can I ask you a personal question?" Elena looked up, grateful for the distraction. Amanda sat down beside her. "You seem worried lately. Is everything okay?" Elena sighed. For a moment, she considered telling Amanda everything but decided against it. It was not fair to spread suspicions about Vivian without being sure of anything. "Just small family issues," she responded vaguely. "Nothing I cannot resolve." Amanda touched her shoulder gently and changed the subject, respecting her friend's privacy. That night, Elena and Nathan had dinner at their favorite restaurant, a cozy Italian place near home. Nathan was in a good mood, talking animatedly about an important case he had won in court. Elena forced herself to pay attention, to smile at the right moments, to ask appropriate questions, but her mind was on that Saturday that was approaching, on that pale yellow house, on that truth she needed to discover. Nathan took her hand across the table and said, "Thank you for always supporting me, love. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." Elena felt her eyes burn. She loved that man more than anything, and it was exactly for that reason she needed to protect him, even if it meant exposing painful secrets about his mother. Saturday arrived with a cloudy sky and the forecast of rain in the afternoon. Elena woke up early, her stomach knotted with nervousness. She had spent the week mentally rehearsing what she would say when she arrived at the pale yellow house. "Hello, I am Elena, Vivian's daughter-in-law. Can you explain to me why my mother-in-law comes here every Saturday?" "No." It sounded too accusatory. "Excuse me for bothering you, but I need to understand the relationship you have with my mother-in-law. Also, not good. There was no way to do this without seeming intrusive and distrustful." Nathan woke up around 8, kissed his wife, and went straight to the shower. He had a tennis game scheduled for 9:30, as always. Elena prepared breakfast while listening to her husband sing in the bathroom. It was such a normal scene, so routine, that she almost gave up on her plan. Almost. But then she remembered that phone call she had overheard. "Mom," Grandma Viv called. No, she needed to go through with it. She needed to understand. When Nathan left for the club around 9, Elena immediately took a shower and got ready. She would wear casual clothes, nothing too formal that might intimidate. At 10:30 in the morning, Elena was parked on the same street as always, observing the pale yellow house. It was too early. She knew that. Vivian only appeared around 3 in the afternoon. But Elena needed to see more, to better understand that family before confronting the situation. She saw Grace leave the house around 11, probably to work a half shift. The children were playing in the small yard. It was such a common domestic scene, but there was something about that family that Elena could not identify. A subtle sadness in Grace's movements, a shadow in her eyes. At 11:30, Elena did something impulsive. She got out of the car, crossed the street, and knocked on the door. Her heart was beating so hard she could hear it in her ears. Grace answered with an expression of surprise. Elena forced a smile and said, "Hello, my name is Elena. I came to talk about Vivian Caldwell." Grace's expression changed instantly. It went from surprise to something between fear and panic. "How did you?" she began to ask, but Elena interrupted her gently. "I am her daughter-in-law. Can I come in? Please, I just want to understand what is happening." Grace hesitated for a long moment, then opened the door wider and gestured for Elena to enter. The house was simple, but clean and cozy. Family photos decorated the walls. Elena sat on the sofa, while Grace called the children to play in their room. When they were finally alone, the two women looked at each other in silence. It was Grace who broke the silence first. "Does Mrs. Vivian know you are here?" Elena shook her head. "So she never told the family," Grace said, more to herself than to Elena. "Told what?" Elena insisted, her voice coming out louder than she intended. Grace stood up and went to a bookshelf from where she took a framed photo. She handed it to Elena without saying a word. The photo showed a young man in his early 20s, handsome, with a bright smile. Elena studied the face, looking for familiarity, but did not recognize the person. "Who is this?" she finally asked. "Owen," Grace replied, her voice breaking slightly. "Vivian and Richard's son, my husband." Elena felt the world spin around her. "But Nathan does not have brothers," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Only Stephanie." Grace shook her head sadly. "He had one. Owen was the son Richard had from a previous relationship. His biological mother passed away when he was very young, and Richard raised the boy alone for a few years. When he met Vivian, she was 22 years old, and Owen was 8. She raised him as if he were her own son, took care of him since he was little, changed his diapers, stayed awake when he was sick, watched him grow up. Owen was Vivian's son in every way that mattered. Elena tried to process the information, but her mind refused to fully understand. "Then, Vivian is Owen's stepmother?" she asked. "No," Grace corrected her. "She was his mother. She raised him, loved him, was there for every important moment. Owen called her Mom. She was the only mother he ever really knew. But," Grace sighed deeply, "there was a problem. A terrible fight in the family when Owen was around 20 years old. Something about inheritance, about Richard's will. Vivian's family, especially her parents, did not accept Owen as part of the family. They said he was just a stepson, that he did not have real rights. They wanted everything to go to Stephanie and Nathan, the biological children." Elena felt nausea rising in her stomach. "And what happened?" "Owen heard everything," Grace continued, her eyes filling with tears. "He heard Vivian's father say he was not really part of the family. He heard Richard hesitate, torn between his son and family pressure. And then, one night, Owen came home and said he was leaving. He said he did not want to cause problems, that he did not want to be a reason for discord. He legally changed his surname, took his biological mother's last name that he never knew, and left home at 20 years old. It was 1982. Grace paused, and Elena did the math quickly in her head. 43 years ago. Nathan had been just 4 years old then. "That is why he does not remember?" Elena asked. "Exactly," Grace confirmed. "Nathan was very young. Owen adored his little brother. He taught him to play soccer, helped him with homework, told him bedtime stories. When Owen left, Nathan was devastated. He asked every day when his brother would come back. But Richard and Vivian made the most cowardly decision possible. They told Nathan that Owen had gotten a job in another state, and it would be better to forget, to move on. Over time, they stopped talking about Owen completely. Nathan was a child. Eventually, his memory became vague. Years later, he barely remembered having had an older brother. Elena felt tears burning in her eyes. "And Stephanie?" she asked. "She was older. She must remember better." Grace nodded sadly. "Stephanie was 14 when Owen left. She remembers him, of course, but they convinced her it was better not to talk about the subject, that it would be too painful for everyone. She agreed, especially after she got married and moved away. It was easier for her to simply leave the past in the past. But Vivian never could. She met with Owen secretly, once a month at first, then every week. He was her son, Elena. She raised him from the time he was 8 years old. She could not just let him go. The story continued. Grace talked about how Owen met her in 2005, how they fell in love, how Lucas was born in 2008. Vivian was at the maternity ward when Lucas was born, Grace said with a sad smile. But she had to lie to Richard, saying she was visiting a sick friend. It was the first time she held her grandson, and could not share that joy with anyone. When Chloe was born in 2011, the same thing. She was a secret grandma, loving those children, but never being able to talk about them. Elena took a sip of the coffee Grace had brought, her hands trembling slightly. The pain in Grace's voice was palpable, and Elena felt her own tears threatening to fall. And then came the accident, Grace said, her voice breaking. May of 2012. Richard had an import-export business. Owen worked there, but with a different last name. Nobody knew they were father and son. They were coming back from a business meeting in another state. It was late at night. A tired truck driver crossed the lane. The impact was brutal. Grace stopped, unable to continue for a moment. Elena waited patiently, her heart heavy. Richard died instantly. Grace finally continued. Owen was taken to the hospital in critical condition. Vivian spent 3 days at the hospital by his side, holding his hand, praying for a miracle. But she could not tell Nathan or Stephanie why she was there. She said she was organizing details of Richard's funeral, dealing with paperwork, all necessary lies. But in reality, she was in 2 different places, one where Richard's body was being prepared for the funeral, another where Owen was fighting for his life. When he passed away 3 days after Richard, I was alone with him, Grace whispered. Vivian held his hand until his last breath, but she could not cry publicly, could not include him in the obituary, could not tell the world she had lost 2 men she loved in the same accident. The tragedy of it all crashed over Elena like a wave. "How did you survive?" she asked quietly. "I do not know," Grace answered honestly. "There were days I did not want to wake up, days when the pain was so great I could barely breathe. But then I thought about Lucas and Chloe, who had lost their father. Lucas was only 4 years old. Chloe was 1. They needed me. And Vivian, she needed us, too. In a way, continuing to take care of us was her way of keeping Owen alive. So she continued visiting every week. Without fail? Elena asked. Grace nodded. Every Saturday afternoon for the past 13 years. It was her way of making peace with all the wrong choices she made, with all the times she should have fought harder for him. She helps us financially, too. Not much, because she does not want Nathan to notice the expenses in her accounts, but enough to make sure the children have what they need. She pays for school supplies, uniforms, sometimes helps with rent when things are tight. Elena's mind was reeling with all the information. Vivian was not involved in anything suspicious or shameful. She was just being a mother and grandmother, loving a part of the family she was forced to keep secret. "Why have you never told Nathan?" Elena asked. "It is not my business," Grace replied simply. Owen made the choice to walk away. Vivian made the choice to protect her other children from the truth. Who am I to interfere? Besides, what if Nathan reacted badly? What if he forbade Vivian from seeing us? It would be like losing Owen all over again. The children love their grandma. She is the only connection they have to the father they barely knew. Elena understood then why Vivian was so careful, so discreet about her visits. It was not shame or guilt over something illicit. It was the fear of losing that last connection to Owen, the fear that the truth would destroy the fragile peace she had built. "Will you tell your husband?" Grace asked, concern evident in her voice. Elena hesitated. On one hand, Nathan had the right to know he had an older brother. On the other hand, revealing the truth now, after so much time, could destroy the image Nathan had of his parents and his family past. It was an impossible decision. "I do not know," Elena admitted finally. "I need to think. I need to process all of this." Grace nodded understandingly. "I understand. But please be gentle with Mrs. Vivian if you decide to talk to her. She has carried this weight alone for so long. She loved Owen more than anything in this world, and the pain of having lost him, of never being able to talk about him openly, of having to mourn in secret, I cannot even imagine." Elena promised she would think carefully before making any decision. She stood up to leave, but before she could exit, the children returned from the bedroom. "Do you know Grandma Viv?" Lucas asked with childlike curiosity. Elena looked at the boy, seeing traces of Nathan in him, especially in the hazel eyes. Those were the Caldwell family eyes, the eyes Owen certainly had. "I do," Elena responded with a sad smile. "She is a very special person." Chloe, the younger one, took Elena's hand and said, "Grandma always brings cookies. Did you bring cookies too?" Elena felt her heart squeeze. "Not this time, sweetheart, but maybe next time." Grace walked her to the door, and the two women exchanged a look of mutual understanding. There were secrets weighing on this whole situation, but there was also so much love. Vivian had loved Owen unconditionally, raising him as her own son, even knowing he did not share her blood. When the family tried to reject him, she continued loving him in secret. When he passed away, she kept his memory alive through his grandchildren, visiting them faithfully every week for 13 years. Elena left the pale yellow house with more questions than answers about what to do next. She spent the rest of that Saturday in a state of numbness. When Nathan came home from the club, he found his wife sitting on the sofa, staring at nothing. "Love, did something happen?" he asked worriedly. Elena forced a smile and said she was just tired, with a slight headache. Nathan, always attentive, made tea for her and suggested they order food for dinner instead of cooking. Elena agreed, grateful for the kindness, but tormented by the guilt of hiding something so huge from her husband. How could she tell him? How would she start that conversation? "Honey, I have been following your mother and discovered she visits a family every Saturday. And actually, you had an older brother that you do not remember because your parents made you forget him." It sounded crazy. She needed more information, needed to understand the complete story before involving Nathan. That night, Elena barely slept. She kept thinking about Vivian, carrying alone the grief for Owen all these years. She thought about Owen, who preferred to walk away from his family rather than face rejection. She thought about Grace, a young widow struggling to raise two children practically alone. She thought about Lucas and Chloe, growing up knowing only half of their family heritage. And she thought about Nathan, innocent of all that complex and painful history. Would it be crueler to tell, or to continue hiding? Elena did not know. On Sunday, during lunch at Vivian's house, Elena observed her mother-in-law with new eyes. She now saw the sadness hidden behind the smile, the invisible weight Vivian carried on her shoulders. When Vivian talked about her late husband, Elena now understood she was omitting half the story. When she mentioned the past, Elena noticed all the gaps, all the edited moments, all the untold truths. It was painful to watch knowing what she knew. At a certain moment, Elena and Vivian were alone in the kitchen, and her mother-in-law commented, "You are different today, dear. Worried about something?" Elena almost broke down right there and told everything but held herself back. It was not the right time. On Monday, Elena could barely concentrate on her classes. Her students noticed the teacher was distracted. During the break, Amanda found her again in the teacher's lounge. "Elena, seriously, what is going on? You are not yourself. It is worrying me." Elena looked at her friend and made a decision. She needed to talk to someone or she would go crazy. "Can you keep a secret?" she asked. Amanda nodded solemnly, and then, in a low voice, Elena told the whole story about following Vivian, about the pale yellow house, about discovering Owen, about everything. Amanda listened in silence, shocked. "Wow, Elena," Amanda finally said when her friend finished. "This is incredible, like a soap opera. But the question is, what are you going to do now?" It was the same question Elena asked herself every moment. "I do not know," she admitted. "In a way, I feel it is not my decision. It is Vivian's. She had reasons to keep it secret all these years. Who am I to destroy that?" Amanda thought for a moment. "But Nathan is your husband. Does he not deserve to know he had a brother, even if it is too late to meet him? It was a valid point, and Elena knew it. That week passed in a fog of uncertainty. Elena avoided calling Vivian, afraid her voice would betray what she knew. She also avoided deep conversations with Nathan, fearing the truth would accidentally slip out. On Thursday night, while preparing dinner, her phone rang. It was an unknown number. Elena answered and heard Grace's nervous voice on the other end. "Elena, I am sorry to bother you. Vivian gave me your number. She knows you were there on Saturday. A neighbor saw us talking and told her. Mrs. Vivian is very worried. She wants to talk to you." Elena's heart raced. "When?" she asked. "Tomorrow, if possible. She suggested you meet at a cafe downtown, away from curious eyes, at 2 in the afternoon." When she hung up, Elena's hands were shaking. She would finally confront Vivian directly. She would finally have the chance to hear the story from her mother-in-law herself, but she was also terrified. How would Vivian react? Would she be angry with Elena for meddling? Would she beg her to keep the secret? On Friday, Elena woke up with her stomach in knots. She taught classes in the morning on autopilot, her mind completely focused on the afternoon meeting. At 1:30, she said goodbye to colleagues and drove to the indicated cafe. It was a small and discreet place, with intimate tables and soft lighting, perfect for difficult conversations. Elena arrived first, ordered a cappuccino she barely touched, and waited. At exactly 2 in the afternoon, Vivian entered the cafe. She looked like she had aged 10 years in 1 week. Her eyes were swollen, as if she had been crying a lot recently. Vivian sat across from Elena in silence, ordered tea for the waitress, and then finally looked at her daughter-in-law. "You know," she said. It was not a question. It was a statement. Elena nodded. "Grace told me. About Owen, about the accident, about everything." Vivian closed her eyes for a long moment, and when she opened them again, they were shining with unshed tears. "I imagined that one day someone would find out. I always knew I could not keep it secret forever, but I hoped I would have more time." "Why did you not tell Nathan?" Elena asked gently. "He has the right to know he had a brother." Vivian sighed deeply. "I know. Believe me, I know. But how do you tell a son he had a brother you hid from him his entire life? How do you explain that his father, whom he idolized, rejected his own son because of family pressure? How do you admit you lied all these years?" The tears finally began streaming down Vivian's face. "I did not have the courage. I was a coward." And the more time passed, the harder it became to tell the truth. Elena reached across the table and held Vivian's hand. "Tell me everything," she said softly. "Tell me from the beginning." And Vivian, after years of silence, finally opened her heart. She told about how she met Richard when she was 22 years old in 1973. He was a recent widower with an 8-year-old son. Vivian fell head over heels in love with both the man and the boy. They got married 6 months later, and Vivian adopted Owen as her own son. He called her Mom, and for all purposes, she was his mother. Stephanie was born in 1973, and Nathan in 1978. It was a happy family, Vivian continued, her voice choked but firm. The problems started in 1982 when Owen was 20 years old. My father, Nathan's grandfather, started questioning Richard's will. He thought it was unfair that Owen, who was technically just a stepson, would receive the same inheritance as Stephanie and Nathan, who were Richard's biological children. There were terrible fights, discussions that lasted hours. Richard tried to defend Owen, but the family pressure was immense. My own parents turned me against the boy I had raised. They said I was being naive, that Owen would take advantage of our kindness. Vivian paused, cleaning her tears with a napkin. "And then, what did Owen do?" Elena asked. "He heard everything," Vivian replied. "He heard my father say he was not really part of the family. He heard Richard hesitate, torn between his son and family pressure. And then, one night, Owen came home and said he was leaving. He said he did not want to cause problems, that he did not want to be a reason for discord. He legally changed his surname to his biological mother's last name that he never knew, and left home at 20 years old. It was October of 1982. Nathan was 4 years old at the time. Vivian continued, her voice thick with emotion. He adored his older brother. Owen taught him to play soccer, helped him with his homework, told him bedtime stories every night. When Owen left, Nathan was devastated. He asked every day when his brother would come back, when Owen would teach him to ride a bike like he had promised. Vivian paused, wiping fresh tears from her eyes. Richard and I made the most cowardly decision possible. We told Nathan that Owen had gotten a job far away, and it would be better to forget about him, to move on. We thought we were protecting him from the pain of rejection, but we were just protecting ourselves. Elena listened in silence, her own eyes filling with tears. Over time, Vivian continued, we stopped talking about Owen completely. Nathan was so young, his memories began to fade. By the time he was 10 or 12 years old, he barely remembered having had an older brother. It was as if Owen had never existed. Stephanie was older. She was 14 when Owen left. She remembered him clearly, but we convinced her not to talk about it. We told her it would be too painful for Nathan, that it was better to let the past stay buried. She agreed, especially after she got married and moved away. It became easier for everyone to simply pretend Owen had never been part of our lives. But you could not forget, could you? Elena asked softly. Vivian shook her head. No, I could not. He was my son, Elena. I raised him from the time he was 8 years old. I changed his diapers when he was sick. I sat up with him when he had nightmares. I cheered at his soccer games. I helped him with his first heartbreak. He was mine in every way that mattered. When he left, it felt like someone had ripped my heart out. But I had to hide that pain. I had to pretend I agreed with the decision, that it was for the best. Richard was devastated too, but he was too proud to admit he had made a mistake, too stubborn to reach out to Owen and beg him to come back. So you met with him in secret, Elena said. Vivian nodded. At first, just once a month. We would meet at a small diner on the other side of town where nobody knew us. Owen was angry, hurt, but he still loved me. He understood I was caught in an impossible position. As years passed, we started meeting more frequently. Once a week, then every Saturday. It became our ritual. I would tell Richard I was going shopping or visiting friends, and I would drive across town to see my son. The son the family had rejected, but that I could never stop loving. When Owen met Grace in 2005, I was so happy for him, Vivian said, a sad smile crossing her face. She was perfect for him. Kind, genuine, hard-working. They got married in 2006, and I was there, but I had to pretend to Richard that I was at a conference for one of my charity organizations. When Lucas was born in 2008, I held my grandson for the first time in the hospital, but I had to lie to my husband about where I had been. I told him a friend from church had emergency surgery, and I went to support her. Every milestone in Owen's life, I was there, but always hiding, always lying. The weight of those lies must have been unbearable, Elena said quietly. It was, Vivian admitted. There were nights I could not sleep, knowing I was living a double life. But what choice did I have? Owen was my son. I could not abandon him just because my family had decided he was not worthy of their love. And then, Vivian's voice broke completely. Then came May of 2012, the worst month of my entire life. Elena reached across and squeezed Vivian's hand, giving her time to compose herself. Richard had an import-export business, Vivian finally continued. Owen worked there under his changed surname. Nobody at the company knew they were father and son. Richard had hired him based on his qualifications, not because of their relationship. Over the years, they had developed a professional relationship, cordial but distant. Richard never admitted it, but I think he was looking for a way to reconnect with Owen without admitting he had been wrong. Working together was his way of staying close to his son without having to apologize. On May 15, 2012, they were driving back from a business meeting in another state. It was late, around 11 at night. A truck driver, who had been on the road for 18 hours straight, fell asleep at the wheel. His truck crossed the median and hit their car head-on. Vivian stopped, her whole body shaking. Elena waited, giving her mother-in-law the space she needed to continue this impossibly painful story. "Richard died on impact," Vivian whispered. Owen was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. He had severe head trauma, internal bleeding, multiple broken bones. The doctors said it was a miracle he survived the initial crash. "I got the call about Richard first," Vivian continued. "The police came to the house around midnight. They told me my husband had been killed in an accident. Nathan was there. He had come over for dinner that evening. I watched my son collapse with grief, and all I could think was that Owen had been in that car too. But I could not say anything. I could not ask about the other victim. I had to pretend I was only grieving for Richard. The next morning, when Nathan finally went home, I called the hospital. They told me Owen was in intensive care, in a coma, and his condition was critical." "How did you manage to be there for both of them?" Elena asked, her heart breaking for what Vivian had endured. "I did not sleep for 3 days," Vivian said. "During the day, I was with Nathan and Stephanie, planning Richard's funeral, receiving visitors, playing the grieving widow. At night, I would tell them I needed time alone to process everything, and I would drive to the hospital where Owen was. Grace was there, devastated, with 4-year-old Lucas and 1-year-old Chloe. I would sit by Owen's bed, holding his hand, talking to him, begging him to wake up, but he never did. On May 18th, 3 days after the accident, Owen passed away. I was holding his hand when he took his last breath. Grace was on one side of the bed. I was on the other. We both lost everything that day, but I could not even properly mourn him. The next day was Richard's funeral. I had to stand there, accepting condolences for my husband, while my heart was shattered into a million pieces for both the men I had lost. Nobody knew. Nobody could ever know that I had lost 2 people I loved in the same accident. The tears were streaming freely down Elena's face now. "Vivian, I am so sorry. I cannot even imagine that pain." Vivian nodded, wiping her own tears. Owen's funeral was small, just Grace's family and a few friends. I went, but I had to park far away and wear dark sunglasses and a hat so nobody would recognize me. I stood at the back, watching them lower my son into the ground, and I could not even go up to the casket. I could not let anyone see me crying for a man that, officially, I barely knew. It was the loneliest moment of my entire life. After that, I kept visiting Grace and the children, every Saturday, without fail. It was my way of keeping Owen's memory alive, my way of being the grandmother I could not be openly. Those children became my lifeline. When I am with them, I feel close to Owen. I see him in Lucas's smile, in Chloe's laugh. They call me Grandma Viv, and for those few hours every Saturday, I get to be what I always should have been allowed to be, a mother mourning her son, and a grandmother loving his children. Elena sat back in her chair, emotionally exhausted from the story. "You have to tell Nathan," she said finally. "He deserves to know." Vivian looked at her with eyes full of fear. What if he hates me for lying all these years? What if he is so hurt that he never wants to speak to me again? Nathan is all I have left, Elena. I cannot lose him too. He will not hate you, Elena assured her, though she was not entirely certain. He will be shocked, hurt, maybe even angry at first, but deep down, he will understand. And he deserves the chance to know about his brother, to know Lucas and Chloe, to be part of their lives. Vivian was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with the decision. "Will you tell him?" she finally asked. "Or should I?" Elena thought carefully before responding. I think we should do it together. I will tell him first, prepare him for the conversation. Then you can share your story directly with him. He needs to hear it from you, to understand why you made the choices you made. But I will be there to support both of you through it. Vivian nodded slowly, a mixture of terror and relief on her face. When? She asked. Soon, Elena replied. This weekend. We cannot let this go on any longer. They stayed at the cafe for another hour, with Vivian sharing more stories about Owen, about the kind of man he had been, about the father he was to Lucas and Chloe. Elena listened, storing away these memories to share with Nathan, trying to build a complete picture of the brother her husband never really got to know. When they finally parted ways, Vivian hugged Elena tightly. Thank you, she whispered, for not judging me, for trying to understand, for wanting to help fix this broken family. Elena hugged her back. We will get through this together, she promised. That weekend felt like the longest of Elena's life. She barely slept Friday night, rehearsing in her mind how she would tell Nathan. Saturday morning, Nathan left for his usual tennis game, completely oblivious to the bomb that was about to drop on his world. Elena spent the morning cleaning the apartment obsessively, a nervous habit she had developed over the years. She vacuumed, dusted, organized drawers that were already organized, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from spiraling into anxiety. Nathan came home around noon, sweaty and in a good mood. He had won his tennis match and was talking animatedly about it while heading to the shower. Elena made lunch, a simple pasta dish that Nathan loved, but she could barely eat a bite. Her stomach was tied in knots. After lunch, when Nathan settled on the couch with a book, Elena knew she could not put it off any longer. Nathan, she said, her voice more serious than usual, we need to talk about something important. Nathan immediately closed his book and turned his full attention to his wife. What is wrong? Are you okay? Elena took a deep breath. I am fine physically, but there is something about your family that you need to know. Something your mother told me. Something that should have been told to you years ago. Nathan's expression shifted to concern. Is Mom sick? Is there something wrong with her health? No, Elena reassured him quickly. She is healthy. But there is a secret she has been keeping. A secret about your past, about your father, about your family. And it is time you knew the truth. Over the next hour, Elena told Nathan everything. She started from the beginning, from overhearing Vivian's conversation with the neighbor, to following her mother-in-law to the pale yellow house, to discovering Grace and the children, to learning about Owen. Nathan listened in complete silence, his face growing progressively paler. When Elena finished, he sat motionless for several minutes, clearly in shock. This does not make sense, he finally said, his voice hoarse. I would remember having a brother. I would remember someone who taught me to play soccer, who read me stories. You were only 4 years old when he left, Elena said gently. Vivian told me you were devastated when Owen disappeared from your life. You asked about him every day. But your parents convinced you he had moved away for work, and eventually they stopped talking about him altogether. Children that young, their memories fade, especially when the adults around them reinforce forgetting. But deep down, Nathan, I think part of you always knew. Have you ever had vague memories of an older boy? Someone who felt important, but you could not quite place? Nathan's eyes widened slightly. There was someone, he said slowly, as if the memories were surfacing from deep underwater. When I was little, I remember someone taller, someone who would lift me up on his shoulders, someone who promised to teach me to ride a bike. I always thought it was a cousin, or maybe just my imagination. But it was him, was not it? It was Owen. Elena nodded, tears in her eyes. It was your brother. And now, Nathan, you have a chance to know him through his children, to be the uncle you should have been all along. Nathan stood up abruptly, running his hands through his hair. My parents lied to me my entire life. They made me forget my own brother. How could they do that? How could Mom keep this secret even after Dad died? She could have told me then, could have introduced me to Grace and the kids. Why did she continue hiding it? Because she was terrified of exactly this reaction, Elena said. She was afraid you would hate her for lying, afraid you would be so hurt that you would push her away. She has been carrying this guilt and grief alone for 13 years, Nathan. Visiting those children every Saturday has been her only way of keeping Owen's memory alive, of still being his mother in the only way she could. Nathan turned to face Elena, and she could see the conflict raging in his eyes. Anger, pain, confusion, but also something else. Curiosity, maybe even a small spark of hope. I need to talk to her, he said finally. I need to hear this from her own mouth. I need to understand why. Elena stood and walked over to her husband, taking his hands in hers. She wants to talk to you. She is ready to tell you everything, to answer any questions you have. But Nathan, please try to remember that she loved Owen completely. She never stopped being his mother, even when the world told her she should not be. Everything she did, as misguided as some of it might have been, came from a place of love. Nathan nodded slowly, his jaw tight with emotion. When? He asked. Now, if you are ready, Elena replied. I can call her. Ask her to come over. Or we can go to her house. Whatever makes you more comfortable. Nathan thought for a moment. Ask her to come here, he said. I do not think I can handle being in that house right now, surrounded by pictures of Dad, knowing he kept this from me too. Elena pulled out her phone and called Vivian. Her mother-in-law answered on the first ring, her voice trembling. Is it time? She asked. Yes, Elena confirmed. Nathan knows. He wants to talk to you. Can you come to our apartment? I will be there in 20 minutes, Vivian said. Those 20 minutes felt like hours. Nathan paced the living room while Elena made coffee, more for something to do than because anyone wanted it. When the doorbell finally rang, Nathan froze. Elena walked to the door and opened it to find Vivian standing there, looking smaller and more fragile than Elena had ever seen her. She looked like a woman about to face judgment, terrified, but resigned. Nathan, Vivian said when she entered the living room, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathan just stared at his mother, 1,000 emotions playing across his face. Is it true? He asked. All of it. Everything Elena told me about Owen, about the accident, about you visiting his family every week for 13 years? Vivian nodded, tears already streaming down her face. It is all true. I know I should have told you years ago. I know I have no excuse for keeping this from you, but I was afraid, Nathan. Afraid of losing you. Afraid of you hating me. Afraid of destroying the image you had of your father and our family. Nathan's composure finally broke. I had a brother, he said, his voice cracking. I had a brother, and you made me forget him. You erased him from my life like he never existed. Do you have any idea what that feels like? To find out at 47 years old that your entire childhood was a lie? I know, Vivian sobbed. I know, and I am so sorry. It was wrong, Nathan. Everything we did was wrong. We should have fought for Owen, should have stood up to my parents, should have kept him in your life no matter what. But we were cowards, your father and I. We chose the easy path, the path of least resistance, and Owen paid the price. And so did you. You lost a brother who loved you more than anything. He used to talk about you all the time, even after he left. He would ask me how you were doing in school, if you still liked dinosaurs, if you had learned to ride that bike yet. He never stopped being your brother, even when he could not be part of your life. Nathan sank into a chair, his head in his hands. Tell me about him, he said quietly. Tell me everything. Who was he? What was he like? Vivian sat down across from her son, and for the next 2 hours, she did something she had been unable to do for 43 years. She talked openly about Owen. She told Nathan about the 8-year-old boy she had met and immediately loved, about watching him grow into a responsible and kind young man, about his love for cars and soccer, about his dreams of one day having his own family. She talked about his relationship with Nathan when Nathan was a toddler, about how Owen had been so excited to have a little brother, about the plans he had made for all the things he would teach Nathan as he grew up. She told Nathan about Owen's heartbreak when he left, about how he had changed his surname to protect the family from further conflict, about his life after leaving home. She talked about his career, about meeting Grace, about becoming a father, and then, with Elena holding her hand for support, Vivian told Nathan about the accident, about losing both Owen and Richard in one terrible night, about having to grieve in secret, about the unbearable weight of mourning alone. When she finished, the three of them sat in silence, emotionally drained. Nathan's face was wet with tears, tears for the brother he never really knew, tears for the relationship they could have had, tears for the years lost to pride and stubbornness and family pressure. "I want to meet them," he finally said. "Grace and the kids. I want to know my brother's family. I want to be the uncle I should have been all along." Vivian looked up, hope breaking through the grief on her face. "Really? You do not hate me?" Nathan stood and walked over to his mother, pulling her into a tight embrace. "I am hurt, Mom. I am angry. I am confused, but I do not hate you. I cannot imagine the weight you have carried all these years, the pain of losing Owen and Dad in the same accident and not being able to tell anyone. That must have been torture. We have a lot to work through, a lot to talk about. But yes, I want to meet my nephews. I want to know the family Owen built. He deserves to be remembered, to be part of our lives, even if he is not here anymore." Vivian clung to her son, sobbing with relief and grief and hope all mixed together. Elena watched them, her own tears falling freely, knowing that this was just the beginning of a long healing process. But at least it was a start. The family that had been broken for 43 years was finally beginning to come back together. The following week was one of the most emotionally complex of Nathan's life. He called in sick to work for the first time in years, something that alarmed his colleagues, but that he could not help. He needed time to process everything, to let the reality of having had a brother sink in. Elena stayed close, giving him space when he needed it, but offering support when he reached out. They talked for hours, going over every detail Vivian had shared, trying to piece together a picture of Owen, of who he had been and what his life had meant. On Monday evening, Nathan made a decision. He wanted to see photos of Owen, wanted to see the face of the brother he could not remember. Vivian came over with several albums she had kept hidden for decades, albums she could never display openly, but could never bring herself to throw away. They sat together on the living room floor, and Vivian walked Nathan through Owen's life in pictures. There was Owen as a young boy, maybe 9 or 10 years old, grinning at the camera with a missing front tooth. Owen as a teenager, tall and lanky, in a soccer uniform. Owen at 20, handsome and serious, just before he left home. Nathan stared at the photos, searching for recognition, for some spark of memory. And then Vivian pulled out a picture that made Nathan's breath catch. It was Owen, probably 19 years old, giving a piggyback ride to a tiny boy with bright hazel eyes. "That is you," Vivian said softly. "You were about 3 years old. Owen used to carry you everywhere. You would not let anyone else hold you when he was around." Nathan touched the photo with trembling fingers, and suddenly a memory surfaced, sharp and clear. He remembered strong arms lifting him up, remembered feeling safe and happy high on someone's shoulders, remembered a laugh that was warm and full of joy. "I remember this," Nathan whispered. "I remember him. Not his face exactly, but the feeling of being completely safe, completely loved. He was my hero, was not he?" "He was," Vivian confirmed, tears running down her face. "You adored him, and he adored you right back. When he left, you cried for weeks. You kept asking when Owen was coming home, when he would finish your bike lessons. It broke my heart watching you grieve for him, but I thought making you forget was kinder than letting you remember what you had lost. I was wrong about that too. Nathan spent that entire week looking at photos, reading letters Owen had written to Vivian over the years, letters she had saved in a box hidden in the back of her closet. Through these artifacts, Nathan began to know his brother. Owen had been kind and thoughtful, funny and hard-working. He had loved classic cars and science fiction movies. He had been devoted to Grace and absolutely besotted with his children. In one letter from 2009, Owen had written to Vivian about how holding baby Lucas reminded him of the little brother he had lost, how he hoped that maybe, someday, somehow, they could all be a family again. Reading that letter destroyed Nathan. His brother had wanted reconciliation, had held out hope even after years of separation, but pride and stubbornness on all sides had prevented it from happening. And now, it was too late. Owen was gone, and Nathan would never have the chance to know him as an adult, to be the brother he should have been. The grief was overwhelming. Grief for someone he barely remembered, but felt connected to on a deep, almost cellular level. It was the strange ache of mourning someone you lost twice, once as a child when they disappeared from your life, and again as an adult, when you learned they died years ago without you even knowing. By Thursday of that week, Nathan knew what he needed to do. He needed to meet Grace and the children. He needed to see where Owen had lived, to understand the life his brother had built away from the Caldwell family. He called Vivian and asked her to arrange a meeting. Vivian contacted Grace, who agreed immediately, though she was understandably nervous. On Saturday afternoon, Nathan, Elena, and Vivian drove together to the pale yellow house that had been the center of so much secrecy. Nathan was quiet during the drive, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Elena could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was clenched. When they pulled up in front of the modest house with its small garden and toys scattered in the yard, Nathan just sat in the car for a moment, staring. "This is where he lived," he said softly. "This is where he was happy, where he had his family." "Yes," Vivian replied from the back seat. "He was very happy here." Grace and the children gave him the unconditional love and acceptance our family failed to give him. They got out of the car and walked to the front door. Before Nathan could knock, the door opened. Grace stood there, her eyes red as if she had been crying. Behind her, Lucas and Chloe peered out curiously. Grace looked at Nathan for a long moment, and Nathan looked back at her, this woman who had loved his brother, who had built a life with him. "I see Owen in your eyes," Grace finally said, her voice trembling. "You have the same kind eyes he had." Nathan did not know what to say, so he just extended his hand. Grace took it, then surprised him by pulling him into a hug. "He would have wanted us to meet," she whispered. "He talked about you, about hoping that one day you would know the truth." They went inside, and for the first time, Nathan saw the life Owen had built. The house was full of photographs of a family Nathan had never known existed. Owen with Grace on their wedding day, both of them beaming with joy. Owen holding newborn Lucas, looking terrified and elated at the same time. Owen teaching a young Lucas to ride a bike, the exact thing he had promised to teach Nathan all those years ago. Owen with Chloe as a baby, her tiny hand wrapped around his finger. Every photo was a window into the life Nathan had missed, the brother he could have known if circumstances had been different. Lucas and Chloe were shy at first, not quite understanding who this stranger in their home was, or why Grandma Viv had brought him. Nathan knelt down to their level and introduced himself. "Hi, I am Nathan. I am your dad's younger brother. I am your uncle." Lucas studied him carefully, his 17-year-old mind trying to process this information. "We did not know Dad had a brother," he said cautiously. "Nobody ever told us." "I know," Nathan replied gently, "and I am so sorry about that." There were a lot of mistakes made by a lot of people, and you kids paid the price for it. But I am here now, and I want to be part of your lives if you will let me." Chloe, more trusting than her older brother, stepped forward and looked up at Nathan. "Do you look like our dad?" she asked with childlike directness. Nathan glanced at Grace, who nodded and pulled out a photo album. She opened it to a page with photos of Owen at different ages and held it next to Nathan's face. The similarity was striking. Same hazel eyes, same strong jawline, same smile. "We could be twins," Nathan said, his voice thick with emotion. Chloe studied both faces carefully, then announced, "You do look like him. I like you." And just like that, with the simple acceptance only a 14-year-old could offer, she hugged him. Lucas was harder to win over. He had vague memories of his father and had spent the past 13 years watching his mother struggle alone. He was protective and wary of this uncle who suddenly appeared after all this time. "Why now?" he asked, his voice edged with challenge. "Why show up 13 years after he died? Why not when he was alive and could have known you?" The question hit Nathan like a punch to the gut. "I did not know he existed, Lucas," Nathan said honestly. "My parents, they made me forget him when I was very young. I thought I was an only child except for my sister. I only found out about your dad a week ago, and I have been grieving him every day since." Lucas's tough exterior cracked slightly. "You did not know about us either?" he asked. Nathan shook his head. "Not until Elena discovered Grandma Viv's secret visits. If I had known, I would have been here. I would have been at the funeral, would have helped your mom, would have been the uncle you deserved. But I cannot change the past. All I can do is be here now, if you will give me that chance." Lucas looked at his mother, who nodded encouragingly. Then he looked at Grandma Viv, who was crying quietly in the corner. Finally, he looked back at Nathan and gave a slight nod. "Okay," he said, "you can be our uncle, but you have to prove it. You have to show up, not just talk about it." "Fair enough," Nathan said, extending his hand. Lucas shook it firmly. A miniature version of his father making a decision to give his father's brother a chance. The rest of the afternoon was spent talking, sharing stories, beginning to build bridges across 13 years of absence. Grace told Nathan about Owen's life after leaving the Caldwell family, about his career, his hobbies, his dreams. She showed Nathan Owen's workspace in the garage where he had restored classic cars as a hobby, where tools still hung on pegboards and oil stains marked the concrete floor. This was his sanctuary, Grace said. He could spend hours out here, working on engines, listening to old rock music. He was happiest when his hands were busy. Nathan walked through the garage, touching Owen's tools, imagining his brother's hands using them, feeling a connection across time and death to someone he barely remembered, but felt bound to by blood and loss. He found himself wishing he could remember more, wishing he could have just one clear memory of Owen, one conversation, one moment. But those memories were lost, stolen by well-meaning parents who thought they were protecting him, but had instead robbed him of his brother twice over. "I wish I could remember him better," Nathan said to Grace. "I wish I had more than just fragments and feelings." Grace smiled sadly. "He remembered you perfectly. He used to tell Lucas stories about his little brother, about teaching you to kick a soccer ball, about how you would follow him everywhere like a little shadow. He said you had the biggest heart of any kid he had ever known. Even after all those years apart, even after everything that happened, he never stopped loving you, Nathan. You were always his baby brother." Those words broke something open in Nathan. He sat down on an old workbench and wept, finally allowing himself to fully grieve the brother he had lost, the relationship they would never have, the years stolen by pride and family pressure and foolish decisions. Elena, who had been quietly observing from the doorway, came and sat beside her husband, offering silent support. Vivian stood with Grace and the children, all of them giving Nathan the space to mourn. When Nathan finally composed himself, he stood and turned to face them all. "I want to do something," he said. "Something to honor Owen's memory. Something to make sure he is never forgotten again. I want to commission a new headstone for his grave, one that includes his full name, his connection to our family, everything he should have been acknowledged as from the beginning. And I want all of us to be there when it is installed, our whole family, together, finally honoring him the way he deserved." Grace covered her mouth, overcome with emotion. Lucas and Chloe looked at each other, then at their mother, then at their new uncle with something like hope in their eyes. Vivian nodded through her tears. "That would mean everything, Nathan, to all of us." Over the next few weeks, Nathan threw himself into planning a memorial for Owen. He worked with a monument company to design a beautiful headstone that read, "Owen Richard Caldwell, beloved son, brother, husband, and father." The middle name was significant. Owen had changed his surname when he left home, but Nathan wanted to reclaim him as part of the Caldwell family, wanted the world to know Owen was Richard's son, Vivian's son, his brother. Nathan also reached out to his sister, Stephanie. That was perhaps one of the hardest conversations of all. Stephanie was 52 years old and living a comfortable life with her husband and their new baby daughter. When Nathan told her about Owen, about everything their parents had hidden, Stephanie broke down, crying. "I remember him," she sobbed over the phone. "Of course I remember him. He was my big brother. He taught me to stand up to bullies, helped me with my algebra homework, drove me to my first dance. And Mom and Dad made me promise never to talk about him, made me act like he never existed. I have carried that guilt for 43 years, Nathan. The guilt of erasing my own brother from history." Stephanie flew in the following week to meet Grace and the kids, to see Owen's house, to grieve properly for the brother she had been forced to forget. The reunion between the three siblings of Owen, Nathan, Stephanie, and Owen's children through Grace was emotional and healing. Stephanie brought photo albums of her own, pictures of Owen from when they were young that Grace and the kids had never seen. There was Owen at Stephanie's elementary school graduation, beaming with pride. Owen teaching teenage Stephanie to drive, both of them laughing in the front seat of an old car. Owen at 15, 16, 17, growing into the man he would become. Lucas studied these photos hungrily, trying to piece together a complete picture of the father he barely remembered. Chloe asked question after question about what her dad had been like as a teenager, what kind of music he liked, what made him laugh. Stephanie and Nathan did their best to answer based on their own fragmented memories and what Vivian could fill in. It was like assembling a puzzle, each person contributing pieces until a fuller image of Owen emerged. He had been funny and protective, serious about his responsibilities, but with a mischievous streak. He had loved old movies and terrible puns. He had been the person everyone went to for advice because he listened without judgment. The memorial was scheduled for a Saturday in early December, 2025. The day arrived cold and gray, with the threat of rain hanging in the air, but the entire family gathered at the cemetery. Nathan and Elena, Vivian, Stephanie and her husband, Grace, Lucas, and Chloe. Even some of Owen's old friends that Grace had tracked down attended, people who had known Owen but had been told to stay away from the Caldwell family. The monument company had done beautiful work. The new headstone was elegant granite with Owen's name, dates, and the inscription Nathan had chosen. "Forever in our hearts, never to be forgotten again." Nathan stood at the grave, prepared remarks in his pocket, but when the moment came to speak, he set aside his notes and spoke from the heart. "Owen, I do not remember much about you, but I am learning. I am learning about the man you were, the brother you tried to be, the father you became. I am sorry I was not there when you needed family. I am sorry our parents' decisions meant you had to build your life away from us, but I promise you this. Your children will never wonder if they belong. They will always know they have family, that they have an uncle and aunt who love them, a grandmother who has always loved them, cousins who will grow up knowing their names. We cannot change the past, but we can honor your memory by being the family you always deserved. Stephanie spoke next, her voice shaking but determined. Owen, you were my protector, my friend, my big brother. I am sorry I let them silence me. I am sorry I did not fight harder to keep your memory alive. But I am fighting now. I am making sure my daughter grows up knowing about her Uncle Owen, knowing that family is not just about blood, but about showing up, about loving even when it is hard, about not letting pride destroy what matters most. Lucas, though crying, stepped forward to speak about the father he barely remembered, but missed every day. My dad was a good man, he said simply. Grandma Viv made sure we knew that, even when she had to hide the truth from everyone else. And now, knowing he had a whole family that would have loved him, that does love us. That makes me sad for what he missed, but hopeful for what we can build together. Even young Chloe spoke, her voice small but clear. I do not remember my daddy much. I was really little when he died, but I remember Grandma Viv always telling me he loved me, that he would be proud of me. And now I have Uncle Nathan and Aunt Elena and Aunt Stephanie, and I am not so sad anymore because I know my daddy's family is here, and they love me too. There was not a dry eye among the gathered group. Vivian, who had spent 13 years grieving in solitude, now stood surrounded by family openly mourning and celebrating Owen together. The burden she had carried alone was finally shared, and though the pain remained, it was more bearable when divided among so many hearts. After the ceremony, they all went back to Grace's house. Someone had the idea to share a meal together, and soon the small kitchen was filled with people making sandwiches, heating soup, brewing coffee. It was chaotic and wonderful, the kind of ordinary family gathering Owen had been denied in life, but would have loved. Nathan found himself in the garage again, this time with Lucas showing him how to change the oil on a car, a skill Owen had taught his son. As they worked side by side, Lucas said quietly, I think my dad would have liked you, Uncle Nathan. I think he would be happy we are together now. Nathan had to stop working for a moment to compose himself. I would have liked him too, Lucas. From everything I have learned, he was an incredible man, and you are so much like him. Smart, strong, protective of the people you love. He would be so proud of the young man you have become. Lucas ducked his head, embarrassed but pleased. As the afternoon wore on, the family began making plans. They decided to make a standing Sunday dinner tradition, rotating between Nathan's apartment, Vivian's house, and Grace's house. They talked about holiday plans, about making sure the kids were included in everything, about maybe taking a trip together the following summer. They were building something new from the broken pieces of the past, creating a family that Owen would have wanted. Later that evening, after everyone had left and Nathan and Elena were back home, Nathan sat holding the photo of Owen giving him a piggyback ride. Elena sat beside him on the couch, her head on his shoulder. Are you okay? She asked softly. Nathan considered the question. I am sad, he said. Sad for the years we lost. Sad that I will never really know him. Sad that my kids will only know their Uncle Owen through stories. But I am also grateful. Grateful that Mom kept his memory alive through Grace and the kids. Grateful that you were nosy enough to follow her and discover the truth. He smiled slightly at his wife. Grateful that we have a chance now to be the family Owen deserved, even if he is not here to see it. Elena squeezed his hand. He sees it, she said. I have to believe that somehow, wherever he is, he knows his family finally came together. He knows his children have the uncle and the extended family he always wanted them to have. Nathan nodded, wanting to believe that too. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, processing everything that had happened over the past month. So much had changed, so many secrets revealed, so much pain unearthed and examined and slowly, carefully healed. The road ahead would not be easy. There were still difficult conversations to have, wounds that would take time to fully heal, trust that needed to be rebuilt. But they were on that road together now, all of them. And that made all the difference. 6 months had passed since that gray December day at the cemetery when the family had finally come together to honor Owen. It was now June of 2026, and the transformation in all their lives was remarkable. What had started as painful revelation and difficult reconciliation had blossomed into something beautiful. A family truly united not just by blood, but by choice, by forgiveness, by the commitment to honor Owen's memory through love rather than secrecy. The Sunday dinners had become sacred. Every week, without fail, the family gathered, rotating between homes as they had promised. Sometimes it was just the core group, Nathan and Elena, Vivian, Grace, and the kids. Other times, Stephanie flew in from out of state with her husband and baby daughter, now almost a year old, and named Caroline Grace, with the middle name chosen to honor Owen's widow. The dinners were loud and chaotic, full of laughter and stories, the kind of ordinary family joy that Owen had been denied, but would have loved. Lucas had graduated from high school in May, and Nathan had been there in the audience, cheering louder than anyone when his nephew's name was called. Afterward, Nathan had pulled Lucas aside and handed him an envelope. Inside was a check for $25,000, money Nathan had quietly set up as a college fund. "Your father should have been here for this," Nathan had said, his voice thick with emotion. "He should have seen you graduate, should have helped you with college expenses. I cannot replace him, Lucas, but I can make sure you have every opportunity he would have wanted for you." Lucas had hugged his uncle tightly, overcome with gratitude and the bittersweet knowledge that his father would have been proud of the man Nathan had become, of the uncle he was trying to be. Chloe had opened up in ways Grace had never expected. The shy 14-year-old who used to barely talk to strangers now chattered constantly about her Uncle Nathan and Aunt Elena, about weekend visits and shopping trips, and how Elena was helping her with a school project about family history. For that project, Chloe had decided to write about Owen, about the father she barely remembered but was learning to know through stories. With Elena's help, she had interviewed Vivian, Nathan, Stephanie, and her mother, collecting memories and weaving them into a beautiful narrative about a man who had been rejected by some but loved fiercely by those who truly knew him. The project had earned her an A+ and a special recognition from her teacher, but more importantly, it had given Chloe a connection to her father that she had never had before. Vivian had changed most of all. The weight she had carried for so many years had finally been lifted, and the difference was visible. She smiled more easily, laughed more freely, moved through the world without the constant burden of her secret. She no longer had to lie about her Saturday visits or hide her love for Owen's children. For the first time in 43 years, she could be fully herself, fully present, without the exhausting effort of maintaining two separate lives. She had started volunteering at a grief support group at her church, finding purpose in helping others navigate the complex terrain of loss. Many people remarked that Vivian seemed to have found a new lease on life, though only those closest to her knew the real reason why. Elena had watched all of this unfold with a sense of quiet satisfaction. Her decision to follow her instincts, to investigate despite her fears, had led to all of this healing. Sometimes in quiet moments, she thought about how different things might have been if she had ignored those whispered conversations, if she had dismissed her suspicions as paranoia. Owen would have remained a secret. Lucas and Chloe would have grown up with only their grandmother's hidden visits, and Nathan would never have known the truth about his brother. The thought made her shiver. How many families, she wondered, carried similar secrets, allowing pride and fear to keep them fractured when they could be whole? One warm Saturday in June, the entire family gathered at Vivian's house for a special occasion. It was Lucas's 18th birthday, and they were throwing him a party, his first real birthday celebration with his father's side of the family present. The backyard had been decorated with balloons and streamers, a banner reading, "Happy Birthday, Lucas," stretched across the patio. Grace had baked his favorite cake, a triple chocolate creation that was probably unhealthy, but absolutely delicious. Neighbors and friends mixed with family, and for the first time, there was no hiding, no pretending. Everyone knew Lucas was Owen's son, and everyone knew the complicated history that had brought this family to this moment. As Elena stood on the patio watching the party, Nathan came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. Elena leaned back against her husband. "I am thinking about how this all started," she said. "With me being nosy and suspicious, following your mother like some kind of amateur detective. If someone had told me then where it would lead, I never would have believed them." Nathan kissed the top of her head. "I am glad you were nosy. I am glad you did not let it go. You gave me back something I did not even know I had lost. You gave all of us a chance to be whole again." They watched as Lucas opened presents, as Chloe recorded everything on her phone, as Vivian sat with Grace laughing about something one of the kids had said. Stephanie was there too, having flown in specifically for the party, her baby daughter toddling around the backyard on unsteady legs. It was the picture of a normal, happy family gathering, the kind that happens every day across the country. But Elena knew it was extraordinary because it almost had not happened, because it had taken so much pain and revelation and forgiveness to get here. Later that evening, after most of the guests had left and only the core family remained, Nathan asked if he could say something. Everyone gathered in Vivian's living room, curious about what he wanted to share. Nathan stood, suddenly looking nervous, and Elena realized she had no idea what he was about to say. "I have been thinking a lot lately," Nathan began, "about family, about legacy, about what we pass on to the next generation. Owen's story, as tragic as it is, taught me something important. It taught me that family is not just about blood. It is about showing up. It is about choosing love over pride, about being brave enough to tell the truth even when it is hard." He paused, looking around the room at each face. "Mom," he said, looking at Vivian, "you made mistakes. You and Dad both did, but you also never stopped loving Owen, never stopped being his mother even when you had to do it in secret. That kind of love, that kind of commitment, that is what I want to carry forward." He turned to Grace. "Grace, you built a beautiful life with my brother, and you raised two incredible kids who are everything he would have wanted them to be. Thank you for letting us in, for giving us a chance to be part of their lives." Grace wiped away tears, nodding her acceptance of his gratitude. Nathan looked at Lucas and Chloe next. "You two have every right to be angry about the time that was stolen from you, about not having your father's whole family in your lives from the beginning. But instead, you chose to open your hearts, to give us a chance. That is remarkable and brave, and your father would be so proud." Finally, he turned to Elena. "And you," he said, his voice breaking slightly, "you could have let this secret stay buried. You could have decided it was not your business, that it was too risky to dig deeper. But you fought for the truth, and in doing so, you gave me the greatest gift. You gave me back my brother, or at least the knowledge of him. You gave me a family I did not know I was missing." Elena felt tears streaming down her face as Nathan continued, "Which brings me to what I wanted to share. Elena and I have been talking, and we have decided we want to start trying to have a baby. We want to bring new life into this family, life that will grow up knowing the whole story, knowing about Uncle Owen, knowing Lucas and Chloe, not as distant relatives, but as close family. We want our children to grow up in a family that tells the truth, that does not let pride or fear keep us apart." The room erupted in excitement. Vivian jumped up to hug both Nathan and Elena, tears of joy replacing tears of sadness. Grace was beaming, already imagining Lucas and Chloe having young cousins to dote on. Stephanie was thrilled at the thought of Caroline having cousins close in age. Even Lucas and Chloe seemed excited, though Chloe immediately started planning what kind of aunt she wanted to be. As the celebration continued around them, Elena caught Vivian's eye across the room. Her mother-in-law mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." Elena shook her head slightly and mouthed back, "No, thank you." Because in the end, Vivian's decision to keep loving Owen despite everything, to keep his memory alive through his children, had made all of this possible. It had kept the door open just wide enough that when the truth finally came out, there was something to come back to, something to build on. 2 months later, on a warm August afternoon, Elena took a pregnancy test in the bathroom of their apartment. Her hands shook as she waited for the result, and when the positive sign appeared, she sat down on the edge of the bathtub and cried tears of joy. She called Nathan immediately, unable to wait even a moment to share the news. He rushed home from work, and they held each other in the bathroom, laughing and crying at the same time. Overwhelmed with happiness and hope for the future, they decided to wait to tell the family until Elena was further along. But keeping the secret was almost impossible. Finally, at the Sunday dinner in mid-September, they gathered everyone together and made the announcement. Elena is pregnant. We are having a baby. The joy in that room was indescribable. Vivian cried so hard she could barely speak, overcome with the knowledge that she would have another grandchild, one she could love openly from the very beginning. Grace hugged them both tightly, saying how happy Owen would be to know his brother was starting his own family. Lucas and Chloe high-fived each other, already arguing about who would be the better cousin. Stephanie immediately started planning a baby shower, her mind racing with ideas and themes. As the weeks and months passed, Elena's pregnancy progressed smoothly. The family was more involved than ever, everyone wanting to be part of this new beginning. Vivian knitted baby blankets and booties, her hands busy with a joy she had thought she would never feel again. Grace organized Elena's growing collection of baby items, drawing on her own experience as a mother. Chloe made elaborate plans for teaching the baby to read, convinced she would be the favorite aunt. Lucas, trying to play it cool, secretly bought a baseball glove, hoping the baby would be a boy he could teach to play catch, the way his father never got to teach him. One evening in late October, Elena found herself at Grace's house, having tea while Nathan and Lucas worked on Lucas's car in the garage. It had become a ritual for them, uncle and nephew bonding over engine grease and wrench sets, talking about everything and nothing in that way men do when their hands are busy. Elena and Grace sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping their tea and watching the autumn leaves fall outside the window. "Can I tell you something?" Grace finally said, her voice soft. "Of course," Elena replied. Grace looked at her with eyes full of emotion. "I spent 13 years wishing Owen's family knew about us, wishing his children had more than just a grandmother who had to visit in secret. But I was too afraid to reach out, too worried about rejection, too protective of what little we had. You did what I could not do. You pushed through the fear and the secrets and brought us all together. My children have an uncle now, and an aunt, and cousins, and a whole family that loves them. I will never be able to thank you enough for that." Elena reached across and took Grace's hand. "You kept Owen's memory alive for his children, when no one else could. You gave them a foundation of love and strength that allowed them to open their hearts when we finally showed up. That took incredible courage and grace." Grace smiled through her tears, and the 2 women sat holding hands, united in their love for this family that had been broken and was now healing. On a cold December morning, Elena went into labor. Nathan drove her to the hospital, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white, simultaneously terrified and elated. The labor was long, nearly 14 hours, but finally, at 8:23 in the evening on December 12, 2026, a baby girl entered the world. She was perfect, with a head full of dark hair and those unmistakable Caldwell hazel eyes. When the nurse placed her in Elena's arms, Elena looked down at her daughter and felt a love so profound it took her breath away. Nathan stood beside the bed, tears streaming down his face as he touched his daughter's tiny hand. "She is beautiful," he whispered. "She is perfect. What should we name her?" Elena looked up at her husband, at this man who had lost a brother and found him again, who had opened his heart to nephews and nieces he never knew he had, who had chosen forgiveness over anger and love over pride. "I think we should name her Olivia," Elena said softly. "It means peace, and she is the peace that came after so much pain. Olivia Grace Harper, for the grace that brought us all together." Nathan nodded, understanding immediately why Elena had chosen that middle name. It honored Grace, the woman who had loved his brother and kept his memory alive. It honored the grace that had allowed their family to forgive and heal. It honored the journey they had all taken from secrecy to truth, from brokenness to wholeness. When Vivian arrived at the hospital an hour later and held her newborn granddaughter for the first time, she looked at the tiny face and saw traces of all of them. Owen's eyes, Nathan's nose, the Caldwell features that connected this baby to a legacy that stretched back through generations. But unlike Owen, who had been rejected and erased, Olivia would grow up knowing exactly where she came from, knowing all the branches of her family tree, knowing that she was loved unconditionally by everyone. Grace came with Lucas and Chloe the next day. Chloe was instantly besotted with her new baby cousin, begging to hold her and declaring herself the official best aunt. Lucas pretended to be less interested, but Elena saw the way he gently touched Olivia's head, the softness in his eyes when he looked at her. "This is the baby girl who gets to grow up with all of us," he said quietly. "She is lucky. She will never have to wonder if she belongs." Over the next few months, Olivia became the center of the family's universe. She was passed from arm to arm at Sunday dinners, sung to in multiple voices, photographed endlessly by proud relatives. But more than that, she became a symbol of hope, of new beginnings, of a family that had found its way back to wholeness. One Sunday in March of 2027, when Olivia was 3 months old, the family gathered at the cemetery. It had been over a year since they had installed Owen's new headstone, and Nathan had suggested they visit together to introduce Olivia to the uncle she would never meet but would grow up hearing about. They stood around Owen's grave, a strange and beautiful gathering. Vivian held Olivia, pointing to the name on the headstone and saying softly, "This is your Uncle Owen. He was brave and kind, and he loved his family more than anything. You are part of his legacy, sweet girl, part of the love he left behind." Nathan knelt by the grave and placed his hand on the cold stone. "Hey, big brother," he said quietly. "I wish you were here to meet your niece. I wish you could see how our family has come together. We are doing better now. We are telling the truth, showing up for each other, being the family you always deserved. I am trying to be the kind of father I think you would have been, the kind of brother you were to me even though I barely remember it. I am trying to make you proud." Elena stood beside her husband, her hand on his shoulder, Olivia sleeping peacefully in her grandmother's arms. She looked around at the gathered family, at Lucas and Chloe standing beside their mother, at Stephanie with her own daughter, at Vivian finally able to openly mourn and celebrate the son she had loved in secret for so long. This was what healing looked like. Not the absence of pain, but the courage to face it together, to transform it into something that connected rather than divided. As they walked back to their cars, Lucas fell into step beside Elena. "Aunt Elena," he said, and she loved how natural that title sounded now, how easily it had become part of her identity. "Thank you for being nosy." Elena laughed, surprised. "What do you mean?" Lucas smiled, the same warm smile his father had had in photographs. Mom told me how you figured everything out, how you followed Grandma Viv and would not let the mystery go. If you had not been nosy, we would still be a secret. I would still be a kid with no extended family, wondering why my dad never talked about his past. So, thank you for caring enough to dig deeper, for not letting sleeping dogs lie, or whatever that saying is. Elena felt her eyes well up with tears, which happened a lot these days thanks to postpartum hormones, but these were happy tears. She hugged Lucas tightly. "You are so much like your father," she said, "kind and thoughtful, and seeing the best in people. He would be incredibly proud of the man you are becoming." They drove back to Nathan's house for dinner, a tradition that had become as natural as breathing. The house was full of noise and laughter, Chloe and Stephanie's daughter playing on the floor while the adults prepared food and shared stories. Vivian sat in the rocking chair with Olivia, singing an old lullaby she had once sung to Owen, then to Nathan, and now to her granddaughter. The circle continuing, the love passing down through generations. That evening, after everyone had left, and it was just Nathan, Elena, and baby Olivia in their quiet apartment. Nathan stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. Elena came up beside him, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. Nathan pulled her close, his other hand resting gently on Olivia's back as she slept in Elena's arms. "I am thinking about how 1 year ago I did not even know I had a brother, and now I have nephews and a niece, and a family that is bigger and more complicated and more beautiful than I ever imagined. I am thinking about how secrets almost destroyed us, but truth saved us. I am thinking about how grateful I am that you were brave enough to follow your instincts, even when it was scary, even when you did not know where it would lead." Elena looked up at her husband, at the peace on his face, the contentment that had replaced the shock and anger from a year ago. "We all had to be brave," she said. "Your mom had to be brave to finally tell the truth. You had to be brave to forgive her. Grace had to be brave to let us in. Lucas and Chloe had to be brave to trust us. It was not just me." Nathan kissed her forehead. "But it started with you," he said. "You saw something was wrong and you did not look away. You could have convinced yourself it was none of your business, but you did not. You cared enough to act, and that made all the difference." They stood together in the quiet apartment, their baby daughter sleeping between them, and Elena thought about the journey that had brought them here. It had started with suspicion and fear, with memories of old betrayals coloring her perception of new mysteries. She had followed Vivian expecting to find something shameful, some secret that would hurt her husband. Instead, she had found a story of love that transcended conventional definitions, of a mother who refused to stop being a mother even when society said she had no claim, of a man who built a beautiful life in the shadow of rejection, of children growing up knowing they were loved even if that love had to be hidden. And now, holding her own daughter, Elena understood more deeply what Vivian must have felt all those years. The fierce, protective love that would do anything, sacrifice anything, bear any burden for your child. Vivian had borne 43 years of secrecy and lies, not because she wanted to, but because it was the only way she knew to keep loving Owen without destroying the family she had left. It was not the right choice, maybe, but it was the choice born of impossible circumstances and a mother's desperate love. As the weeks turned into months and months into years, the family continued to grow and heal. Olivia thrived, surrounded by more love than any one child probably needed, but exactly as much as she deserved. She took her first steps at Vivian's house during a Sunday dinner, with everyone cheering her on. Her first word was not Mama or Dada, but Viv, much to Vivian's delight and Nathan's mock outrage. Lucas went off to college with Nathan's financial support and weekly phone calls, always reminding him that family was there if he needed anything. Chloe grew into a confident young woman who wrote an award-winning essay about her father for a national competition, no longer hiding his story, but celebrating it. Grace started dating again, tentatively at first, but with the family's support and encouragement. She deserved happiness, they all agreed, and Owen would have wanted her to find love again. Stephanie had another baby, a boy this time, and named him Owen Richard, ensuring that her brother's name would live on in the next generation. And Nathan became the father he had always hoped to be, one who told his daughter the truth, who taught her that family was about more than blood, who made sure she knew every branch of her family tree, even the ones that had been hidden for so long. One evening, when Olivia was 2 years old, she sat on Elena's lap looking at a photo album. She pointed to a picture of a young man with a bright smile and hazel eyes like her own. "Who dat?" she asked in her toddler voice. Elena touched the photo gently. "That is your Uncle Owen," she said. "He is your daddy's brother. He is in heaven now, but he loved his family very much, and we love him back." Olivia studied the photo seriously, then leaned forward and kissed it with her chubby toddler lips. "Love you," she said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to love someone you had never met. And in that moment, Elena knew they had succeeded. Owen was not a secret anymore. He was not ashamed to be hidden or a pain too great to mention. He was part of their family story, woven into the fabric of who they were, remembered with love and honored with truth. His children had family. His mother could openly mourn him. His brother knew his name, and his niece would grow up hearing stories about the brave man who had loved his family even when they could not love him back the way he deserved. 5 years after that gray December day, when they had first gathered at Owen's grave, the family stood there again. But this time, it was for a celebration, not just a memorial. Lucas was getting married, and he had asked if they could take photos at his father's grave, wanting Owen to be part of his wedding day even in absence, his bride-to-be, a kind woman who loved him deeply, understood without question. So there they were, dressed in wedding finery, gathered around a headstone, taking family photos that included someone who was not physically present, but was absolutely there in spirit. Olivia, now 7 years old, stood between Nathan and Elena, holding a small bouquet of flowers. She knew the story by heart now, could tell anyone who asked about her Uncle Owen, about how families sometimes break, but can be put back together if people are brave enough to tell the truth. She placed her flowers on the grave carefully, then stepped back and took her parents' hands. "I wish I could have met him," she said. "Not for the first time. He sounds really nice." Nathan knelt down beside his daughter, his own eyes misty. "He was, sweetheart. And you know what? I think he would have loved you so much. Just like we all do." As the sun set that evening and the family finally left the cemetery, Elena looked back one last time at Owen's grave, now covered in wedding flowers and surrounded by evidence of the family he had always wanted. A family that had fought through secrets and pain to find each other. A family that had learned that love was stronger than pride, that truth was more healing than comfortable lies, that it was never too late to choose to do the right thing. She thought about that October afternoon so many years ago when she had first followed Vivian to a pale yellow house. She thought about her fear, her suspicion, her determination to uncover the truth. She thought about all the ways it could have gone wrong, all the ways the secret could have destroyed them, rather than ultimately bringing them together. But it had not destroyed them. It had transformed them. It had taken everything they thought they knew about their family and rewritten it into something more honest, more complete, more beautiful. As they drove away into the sunset, 3 generations of a family that had been broken and was now whole, Elena whispered a quiet thank you to the universe, to fate, to whatever force had pushed her to follow her instincts that day. Because of that choice, because of her courage to seek truth, even when it was uncomfortable, a family had been saved. A man who had been erased was remembered. Children who had been secrets were claimed. And love which had been forced to hide in shadows, could finally stand in the light. That, Elena thought, as she looked at her sleeping daughter in the back seat and her husband driving beside her, was worth every moment of fear, every difficult conversation, every tear shed in the journey to get here. That was what it meant to be family. Not the absence of mistakes, but the courage to face them, to own them, and to transform them into something better. Owen Richard Caldwell had been loved in secret for 43 years, but now, and for all the years to come, he would be loved openly, honestly, completely. And somehow, Elena believed, wherever he was, he knew. He knew that his family had finally found their way back to each other. He knew that his children were surrounded by love. He knew that his story, which had begun with rejection and pain, had ended with forgiveness and healing, and that, more than anything, was what made the whole journey worthwhile. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment below. What city are you watching from? And if your heart tells you to, feel free to leave me a tip on Buy Me a Coffee. Just check the first pinned comment. Thanks for keeping me company and for the coffee, and I'll see you in the next story.